Just to begin with, I wanted to do a quick acknowledgement of country. I want to acknowledge the Palawa Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the original owners of the land of Lutruwita, Tasmania, from which I'm joining you all today. I'm on Kanamaluka land today, the country of the Litarumina people and the Panina people. As I join you today, I honour these people and the tribes of Lutruwita who are no longer here, as well as the community of today who remain on the owners of this land. I would welcome you all to post in the chat where you are joining from today. Great. So welcome all, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Brooklyn. I'm a member of the committee, the TASA Post Grad subcommittee. I'll be facilitating today's webinar. I'm really excited about our panelists and the discussion we have lined up today. So I'm pleased to introduce you all to Dr. Letitia Coles, who is a mixed method sociologist at the Queensland Brain Institute at the University of Queensland, and Dr. Zoe Staines, Senior Lecturer at the School of Social Science, also at the University of Queensland. We're thrilled to have them here today, and we will be talking about applied sociology. We'll be talking about breaking out of the academic bubble for real-world impact. Letitia and Zoe, we are so grateful for you we're so grateful to have you here with us today, and we're really looking forward to hearing from you. So I think we will get into the panel discussion now. First, to get ourselves a little bit situated, I wanted to ask, what does applied sociology mean to each of you? How do you put it into practice, and what do you feel are the benefits of applied sociology?
Would you like to get us started?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so some benefits of applied sociology for me personally have the opportunity to work with people Health Research Centre at the Children's Hospital in Queensland. And so a lot of my work is to do with the experiences. Oh, are you able to hear me? Sorry, I've just come up with an error on my computer, but that's all good now. So the people that I work with are families of children with disability, and understanding their experiences of navigating health, education, and social service systems. And so stepping outside of the bubble means that I've been able to understand how my work impacts people in real life, sort of beyond the theoretical. And while I have been able to apply the sociological theories that are part of my the learning that I've done through my training and my discipline, sort of being able to step away from that and understand that in a practical sense of how the things that I learn and that I know interact with people's own lived experience has been really eye-opening, and I have to say kind of humbling as well at the same time. So it's shaken some of my preconceived ideas about the world in really profound and meaningful ways, as an overview.
Beautiful, that's awesome. Zoe?
Yeah, thank you, Brooklyn, and thanks for the opportunity to be on this panel today. I'll acknowledge that I'm joining from the unceded lands of the Yagara and Turrbal peoples here in Meanjin, Brisbane, in Queensland. Letitia and I are both at UQ, so we're a UQ heavy panel today, but why not? In terms of applied sociology and what are the benefits, I mean, I think most academics are sold on the benefits of this. Like, we don't, most academics, in fact, perhaps even all academics, or certainly most, we don't join academia in order to kind of sit in our room, in our office, and theorize about the world only. Of course, that can be fun, but that's not all we kind of seek to do. We also want to see that the work that we are doing and that the research that we're undertaking has some impact beyond just our kind of what can often be a bit of an echo chamber of, you know, academic colleagues or within disciplines like sociology, but within academia more broadly as well. So, you know, that's a huge benefit of stepping outside of the academic bubble, is just seeing the opportunities and taking up the opportunities for your research to actually have some meaningful impact. My research tends to span sort of social policies, so I consider conditional welfare policies, and some of my students here today who I've seen on the screen, which is so great. And their work is fantastic and it looks at, you know, conditional housing and things like that. And they both work in really engaged ways. But my research also works with, or has worked with in the past and continues to do so, with remote living Indigenous peoples and communities. And so, and organisations as well as peak bodies. The Australian Human Rights Commission is one of my recent partnerships. So, you know, being able to have that opportunity to work with people who are the proper knowledge holders, right? So academics are often positioned as experts. And yeah, we do have expertise in some areas, but our expertise is also incredibly limited. So being able to work with the people who really understand and live the issues that we research every day, who are the actual knowledge holders, you know, is amazing. It leads to actual impact for the research, and it also brings joy. It brings great joy, and it's something that it's an aspect of, I love being an academic, but it's one of the aspects that I love most about academia. I'll park that there for now.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you. I love your point about the real knowledge holders. That's really fantastic. If you don't have anything else to add, I'll move on to my next question, which was sort of bouncing off what you've both talked about. But do you think it's important for sociologists to engage with community and industry to see that sort of impact and practical side of their work? And what are your experiences with engaging with community and community? Have you had any challenges, any, you know, really positive experiences?
Yeah, I mean, as Zoe said, this is sort of a known thing now, and you know, commonly understood thing that it's essential for us to engage with the people that we're trying to understand the experiences of. And so some of the work I do is, you know, co-design, so it's an essential part of that, and working with children to not only just, I have a question about the world and I need to understand it from these other people's perspectives, but also working with the end users, or you know, people with lived experience, to even say, are the questions that I'm asking worth asking? Are these the questions that should be asked? Are these essential questions? And so ensuring that that our end users, our knowledge holders, are embedded within the research process from the very beginning is really important. The challenges to that are, there are many challenges, I guess, or some challenges to that. Increasingly, there are challenges around funding. So, for example, like the practical challenges of funding people's expertise. So if we want to co-design something with members of the community, then we need to pay them for their expertise and for their time. And so seeking funding for that is a barrier from a practical perspective. You know, I work in interdisciplinary research teams, so I work collaboratively and very closely with pediatricians and developmental psychologists and community organisations, and so we each come at questions from a slightly different perspective, and that's both challenging and incredibly beneficial as well. And so you're navigating sometimes different languages to problems or to topics or issues. and there can be, you know, common sense misunderstandings around terminology even, and so sort of seeing that you're on the same wavelength is important. So, you know, keeping really open communication dialogues and things like that. So they're just some, you know, in no hierarchical order of difficulties, challenges, and benefits, but there's some of the ones that I can think of.
Yeah, all of those resonate with me, Letitia, as well, and probably others in the room as well. I can't remember the first part of your question, Brooklyn. I'm just stuck on the challenges now, but maybe you can remind me after I waffle on a bit about challenges. But just thinking about some of the challenges, because of course there are so many benefits, but definitely the institutional structures that we work within in academia, as you alluded to, Letitia, they aren't always set up well to allow us to spend the time needed and to dedicate the effort and energy that's needed to build really deep and lasting and meaningful partnerships and relationships, because that's what it's about. It's about relationships, not just sort of partnering for some, you know, utilitarian kind of output. But, you know, oftentimes, like you said, Letitia, getting funding to do that initial seed work is difficult, right? In terms of, you know, developing and building and strengthening those partnerships. And often that can just, I'm sort of going off on a bit of a tangent here, possibly, but, and we might have other questions about this, Brooklyn, in terms of, you know, the practical steps. But for me, building partnerships, often that has just been, you know, sometimes years of checking back in, giving people a phone call, checking about what their kind of status is on whatever issue we're talking about, going away for 6 months, coming back with different ideas of how we could do this differently. You know, it takes time, and that's really difficult. It can be difficult to get the funding. The other thing is in terms of navigating those institutional structures in academia and how they perhaps don't always necessarily align very nicely with research partnerships, is, you know, the time frame that we need to undertake research. Really high quality research is often mismatched or disjointed with the time frame that industry partners are looking for outputs, outcomes, research findings to be produced within. You know, I come from a background of working, I spent some time working in government, but also in the not-for-profit sector before I came to academia. And that's been useful because I have some level of competency around understanding how quick-paced those environments can be, and, you know, the need to sort of have some information, have new information now, have this research project done in 6 months because we need this before this policy comes in, or whatever it might be. So I understand that and I'm sympathetic to it, but it doesn't always necessarily match up with the timeframes that we need to do that kind of deep research in. So developing good relationships is a good foundation for, I suppose, navigating and managing those challenges and those tensions that can sometimes arise. But ultimately, coming back to the first point, you know, it's about a relationship, and a relationship needs to be reciprocal. It needs to be two-way. It needs to not be extractive. And so, you know, I think academia and academics in general are still struggling with how that looks in different ways. And of course, it looks different to different people and different groups that you might be working with and different partners. But I think in general, we need to do that better, be less extractive, and ensure that we're managing our relationships in reciprocal and mutually beneficial ways. It's something I strive to do, but I'm not the best person to ask about whether I succeed in that. I'm sure that I don't all the time. My partners would be better people to speak about that, but it's something that's kind of a lifelong and continued learning journey, and something that I think is also that part of the joy of partnering, because it's about learning, you know, how that relationship looks and how it could look into the future as well.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much, both of you. To piggyback off of that a little bit, do either of you have experience with using media, like traditional media or social media, to engage with your communities or to break out of that academic bubble as we've been talking about? Yeah, did you want to tell us about whether you had any experiences with that, or maybe tell us why you have chosen not to go down that path?
I'll let you start with that one, Zoe. My social media experience is kind of limited.
No worries. Yeah, I am not amazing at social media. I'll come back to that maybe. I might park that. And just say that actually I have a really purposeful approach to my research outputs insofar as I make sure that at least sort of 15 to sometimes even up to 20% of all of my outputs are non-academic, right? So things like media engagement, doing interviews for media that reach out to me, you know, making sure that I'm publishing in non-academic outlets, which I'm pretty sure you would do as well, Letitia. Things like The Conversation, but that's kind of old school now. Like there are so many, and it's harder to get into than it ever was before. I don't know if anyone else has had, it's really impossible. Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I can't publish in there.
Neither. I'm
Not gotten in ever.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But the good news is, though, that there are heaps of, it kind of used to be the only place, the only quasi-academic place to publish, but now there are lots of other competitive, you know, blogs, academic, you know, and getting to know what those are in your area is really important. They're good places to get in touch with not only other academics in our echo chambers, but also, excuse me, also industry experts, right? So I try to publish in policy blogs. I try to publish in like tax and transfer blogs and things like that. And that has led to raising, to some extent, I think, my profile in terms of my research areas. Social media, I'll circle back to that. Yeah, look, social media is good. I have had a conversation with one of my PhD students who's in the room, and I won't call her out, but about the kind of benefits, but also the drawbacks of LinkedIn, and how it feels to have to brand yourself as an academic. It feels kind of icky, and I've always found it really icky as well. So I think it's up to the individual how comfortable they feel to kind of lean into that space and, you know, embrace it. But for me, I'll say that it has been useful to have at least a shell of a LinkedIn profile. I'm not really active on LinkedIn, but it's a useful place to connect with other, again, not only academics, but industry people, peak body experts. I've had good conversations with peak body experts that I might not have otherwise been in contact with through LinkedIn. As in I was in contact with them through LinkedIn, and I might not have otherwise had that opportunity. Other forms of social media, Twitter, Elon Musk, but you know, the blue sky stuff, I haven't yet made that leap, but I think a lot of people have. So, but other, you know, other social media avenues are really good for increasing take up of your work, not only just within the academic kind of bubble, as we're calling it today, but also beyond. And just a tip, it's kind of a more academic tip, but if you are going to like tweet or whatever the blue sky equivalent to that is, we can't say X for Twitter. I don't know. I'm so confused. But if you're going to do that, if you're going to lean into that space, then put your DOI in, because that's where you get your altmetric marks. Anyway, so that's just a side note, but I have found that it's useful to lean into those spaces, but also, you know, think about getting creative as well and moving beyond paywalls. So if there are other ways that you can get your message across in a way that's more digestible and more relevant to the industry partners, the policymakers that you want to speak to and that you want to take up the message that you're sending, then find ways to do that. I tend to make a lot of policy submissions. I think some of them may be read and others aren't. But also policy briefs, shorter policy briefs that I've sent to politicians and have been contacted and, had those opportunities in that way as well. So think about other ways that you can go about engaging beyond the academic bubble. So media, social media is one way. It's not the only way.
Yeah, I can resonate with all of those. A lot of the work that I do, so I work a little bit with Thriving Queensland Kids Partnership, and industry or the non-academic sector, as Zoe alluded to before, tend to move really quickly and really rapidly. And it's completely different to publishing in an academic journal, for example. So I've written with some of my partners, and then they've published some of that on their platforms, and that engages directly with, I guess, the users of the organisation. So, for example, some of the work that we've done with Down Syndrome Australia, they will be disseminating that information directly to their families who are engaging with them. I've also, to disseminate some of the research that I conducted at the Children's Hospital a couple of years ago, we packaged that up in a webinar format and then presented that through our partners, ARACI, so the Australian Research Alliance for Children and Youth. And that was pretty cool because that webinar was attended by over 100 people from government departments, from the disability sector, from education researchers, and that was a fun and really in a good way of not only kind of disseminating information, but also we made it sort of interactive so that we could still get some, it was a bit of a knowledge transfer activity, and we were able to bring families and community organisations and government departments together to provide feedback on some of the insights that we had from our work, and that was great for refining the work in a bit more of a collaborative sense with the community, a light touch collaboration. And that's one way, I guess. It's not social media per se, but I guess it's technology, how to engage with that. Yeah, I haven't sort of, I guess, deliberately or intentionally used social media to break out of the bubble, but just reiterating what Zoe said, I'm connected with the community organisations. They've got LinkedIn profiles, but I tend to I don't spend too much time and energy on it. I think this gig is so intense a lot of the time, and you're constantly working. And I think if I was spending so much time on social media, I think that would just sort of drive me a bit crazy. And yeah, there's the ick factor as well. And I don't know, I know I'm supposed to create a brand and I'm supposed to do all these things, and I just kind of can't do all of the things. My capacity is kind of limited. Sometimes I just want to sit down and get my work done and not have to worry about all of that stuff, but maybe I'm 45. Maybe that's the function of my age, I don't know. But yeah, so that's what I do. You can do a bit of LinkedIn, there's a little bit of that. It's cool to engage with community and industry in that way, and other academics. Yes, I also haven't ventured into Blue Sky yet either. I gave up Twitter a while ago, but I did use Twitter in its day for connecting with other researchers, particularly at conferences and things like that, and connecting with industry. It was cool for a while. Yeah.
Oh, great.
The other thing, sorry, I'll just add to that, Brooklyn, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
I was just going to say the other thing perhaps that hasn't been covered yet is that most universities in which we're working will often have a media team, right? So they'll often, like our faculty has a team that's dedicated to helping you get your research out there, get visibility in the media, invite media interviews and things like that. They'll even do media training with you and things like that. So it's very likely that most universities will have a similar respective team. So do reach out to them if you've got like a new exciting report that you're publishing, or you want to get your research out there. They'll probably be able to help you as well.
Oh, great. That's very helpful. That's very insightful stuff. I've got a question from one of our attendees here. How much communication output is directed back towards the research partners, and in what forms?
Do you want to go first, Letitia?
Sure. Yeah, that's really, I guess, project specific and partner specific. So some of the, can you repeat that question again, Brooklyn? So
how much communication output is directed back towards the research partners, and in what forms?
Yeah, okay. So I guess I communicate through different means with research partners, and there'll be formal and informal ways that we do that. So obviously you might have sort of project reports at different milestones along the way that you'll communicate back to your research partners with, and then there'll be, informal meetings and that kind of thing. In terms of other formal communications, a lot of it takes the form of reporting, sort of formal reporting. We try to make that as, I guess, interesting as possible. And it'll be really dependent on the research partners themselves and the parameters of the project, what your agreements that are in place. We might, for example, have a requirement to meet once a month or something, and then we communicate in that way over a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting. Yeah, I think, I'm not sure, Zoe, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I probably don't have too much to add that's different to what you've said, Letitia. Similar for me, it really obviously depends, like you've said, on the partner and what their needs are in terms of communication, because you want to be able to balance the need for keeping those communication channels open whilst also not overburdening the partner. And pushing too much their way that they might be like, geez, get off my back, go and do the damn research. So I think it's it's a careful negotiation. Again, it comes back to that kind of relationship building and establishing at the outset what those expectations are. So similar to Letitia, that has involved anything from regular meetings at certain points in the research life cycle that are particularly intensive, but then maybe those become a little less frequent in other parts of the research life cycle. It's involved attending partner-run seminars in other parts of Australia and delivering research there. So that was something we did up in the Torres Straits, for instance, in a project that we worked on up there. We were invited back to deliver the research to the community. We did that and invited community feedback, which was really rich and wonderful and such a great experience. And kind of really goes to grounding the research again and seeing the kind of impact of the research that you do. But yeah, all of that typical stuff like report writing as well, co-report writing with partners, which can be very, very rewarding, but also has its challenges. And like you said, Letitia, also having our partners or our partners offering to and being proud to hopefully publish those reports on their platforms as well and share those reports those ways, doing webinars and things like that. So yeah, I think it really depends, and ultimately setting those expectations from the start really matters. Something that I haven't done with all of my partners because I'm kind of led by the partner that I'm working with, but certainly with some, particularly if I'm working in partnership with Indigenous orgs, is to set up a very clear MOU. And I say that particularly because, or I say particularly with Indigenous orgs, is because there's a very long history of researchers working with Indigenous peoples, which I'm sure that we're all aware of here, and taking quite an extractive approach, and creating immense harm in the process. And so setting up an MOU that really gives voice to both what both parties want and the expectations of both parties, particularly detailed expectations around things like data sovereignty and questions like that, or that might arise during the project, is really, really important. And having that MOU in place at the outset is a good way to do that as well, and including to set up those expectations around ongoing communication.
Wonderful, thank you. I think I have one last question from me before we move on to questions from the room. But I just wanted to know, so how do you assess the impact of your applied sociological work, and how do you know if it's making a tangible difference?
That's a small one for you to tackle if you want, Letitia.
Yeah, just a little question there. How do I know if it's making an impact? Look, there are kind of formal ways of knowing if the work that you're doing is being taken up. So, for example, some of the work I've done has been embedded into the Children's Hospital strategic plan. So okay, that's making an impact in some of the strategies that they're wanting to implement at the hospital for improving, children's experiences in hospital. That's cool. So that's one way of measuring impact. There are sort of more ad hoc ways of measuring impact. If people that you're collaborating with generally talk about having a good experience, that's super nice. Then that's really good. There's the impact, there's academic impact, how often your journals get read and cited by other academics. That's something that goes onto the CV. I don't know that really feels like an impact to me. It sort of feels tautological in its whole experience in a way. So it's really about, can I see that the work that I'm doing is being taken up by people who are making decisions and changing policies? But also we need to think about impact in terms of positive and negative impact. So ensuring that the work that we're doing doesn't have inadvertent negative consequences either in the short term. So the experiences of people that we're working with, is their experience of engaging with us a positive experience, not overburdening people. Ensuring as well that, and this is a problem, I think, in research more broadly, that we sometimes get funded to collect data, but we don't often get funded to analyze and do things with it. So ensuring actually that the time that we've taken from other people, there's a closing of the loop to that, and we're able to do things with the information that we get. Yeah, I think that's some of the ways in which I can think about impact. There are many others that might come into my head as Zoe.
Yeah, no, those were the ones that came into my head as well. And, so I think ultimately, and it gels with what you were saying as well, Letitia, but ask your partners.
Yeah, oh yeah.
I think that's kind of what it aligns with what you were saying. If your industry partners, they're the ones usually on the ground, who are working day to day with the issue, the topic, the area that your research is touching on or looking at. They're going to be a really good a good sort of check on whether the research that you're doing collaboratively is actually making a difference. I suppose that there are the other forms of impact as well, and particularly as a social policy researcher, I'm constantly sort of hoping that my work might be taken up by people who make decisions around social policy, so policymakers. And so, like I said before, a lot of my work is to try to kind of engage policymakers in thinking differently about social policy and thinking about alternative policy futures that are fairer and more just, and that actually reduce rather than exacerbate social inequalities, for instance. Something that we know that particularly the Australian social security system is very bad at, reinforcing and perpetuating and worsening inequalities. So in terms of thinking about impact there, I'm looking for evidence that policymakers are engaging with my work or engaging with the stories of the people who are directly impacted that I'm trying to elevate in my work, right? And trying to sort of make sure that those stories are heard. Here comes my cat. So if he makes a visit on the screen, let's just see how we go. And yeah, and sort of, there are various ways to do that. There are different, the names are escaping me right now, but there are different online platforms where you can go and search for where you're cited in policy documents in particular. So that's one way. Obviously, the ultimate dream is to have made some impact on policy change. And we like to say that, so compulsory income management was a big focus of one of the projects that I was working on for a few years, and still is to some degree a focus of my work. And it was removed, after we did lots of work and lots of campaigning alongside amazing advocates and industry partners. It was removed from many communities across Australia. And we like to say that in some way, maybe we contributed to that. However, we haven't been able to contribute to the full removal of conditional or compulsory, I should say, income management, which still operates in the Northern Territory. So, and in the Cape as well, where I used to work up there. So, yeah, the kind of the platforms that you can go to, but then thinking about, well, what does that translate into in the kind of blue sky thinking policy change arena as well, and how can you possibly have some input into that. It's very hard to measure though, ultimately. There are lots of forces at play, including politics.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you both. So I just wanted to say thank you both for all the insight. That's all the questions I had lined up. I wanted to turn it back over to our attendees. If you want to raise a hand or put a question in the chat. We've already got a couple questions in the chat, so I'll start with those. So we've got Emily asks, how do you initiate community and government partnerships?
Yeah. This is one of my favorite things to do, I think. It sounds so there's two ways. Well, there's probably several ways, but there's two main ways that I tend to do this. And the one is obviously, particularly earlier on in your career, you use your senior networks as conduits. And so, I've had my supervisors, either my PhD supervisor or my, now the people who supervise me in my work, connect me with people that they're connected to. So I might have an idea, or I might have a particular interest that aligns with an interest that who they partner with, and they'll introduce me. And I get then an opportunity to talk to their existing partners about my idea, and then they might be able to partner with me. And that's for community and government partnerships. Another way I do it is sometimes if I know somebody who works with somebody who I'm also interested in working with, I might just cold email them myself and just say, I'm really interested in doing this. I've got some ideas for some future work. Could we have a conversation? And it's either a coffee conversation or a conversation over Zoom. And it might even be, I've had conversations where I've said, look, I have an idea. I'd like to develop this idea for a future grant proposal. I don't exactly yet know what your involvement would be, but in principle, would you be interested in maintaining a conversation or having some kind of input into this? And in the future. And so those are sort of ways in which you can start to develop these networks and connections in terms of initiating them. That's how I do it.
Yeah, probably won't surprise everyone to hear that I'll say much the same. Yeah, I certainly, those two ways that you talked about, Letitia, definitely resonate with me. So having, leads, I suppose, through other researchers, not necessarily just direct mentors, but or supervisors, but other researchers that I've worked with who we get to know each other, we work well together, they trust me, I trust them, and then they're willing to invite me in on other projects with additional industry partners, for instance. So that's one way, definitely. And of course, I've done some of the cold calling as well. And that has generally been really good, so people will generally be really lovely about how they respond. And if they don't have time, that they just say, don't have time, or, but it has also led to some really great discussions about possible future partnerships. Another one is linking, this probably is a little less related to the kind of how to start out, but once you do get started, there tends to be also a bit of a snowball effect, right? So I'm just thinking about my partnership with the Human Rights Commission and the now former Social Justice Commissioner for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians, which has led to, and we did a national project on care work, on Indigenous women's care work, and that led to an invitation, for instance, by Carers New South Wales, which is a peak body down in New South Wales, and Carers Australia to reach out and invite us to do a seminar, like a webinar on it, right? And now we're talking with Carers New South Wales about doing some more work with them. So there tends to be a bit of a kind of snowballing as well, once you get into those networks that kind of know and trust each other as well, which kind of speaks to that bonding capital, but then that bridging capital as well, for, to put it into that sociological language. Another thing that I did do, particularly when I was starting out, and that's not that long ago, in academia, I mean, was attend industry and peak body conferences. And I'm sure that many in the room do that already, but that's a really good way to just get known by, and, to be in the room with people who are working on a kind of ground level, that's a stupid term, but, on a day-to-day basis with the issues that you're researching. And just to start those conversations, like you said, Letitia, often it's just a coffee, right? It's just, hey, you've got a similar interest. Hey, why don't we chat more about that? And then, that might snowball into something else. I think in all of this also, we need to be led by our values as researchers and think about, there is a lot of push from the kind of neoliberal university to partner for the sake of partnering, for the sake of getting funding, right? Which is, one thing, but being led by your values means taking the time to make sure that those partnerships are, or that those partners are partners that share similar values to you, right? That want similar things from the research project or from the research partnership. And that will operate in a way that is, kind of conducive to your value set around, whatever it is. Certainly for mine, it's around thinking about how to elevate voices of marginalised peoples who don't necessarily always get the chance to speak to policy and speak to policymakers, even though they're affected by it daily, right? And sometimes I do an okay job at that, sometimes not so much, but that's certainly a value I try to stand by. And I make sure that I'm working with partners that have that same value. So I think being led by that is important. And trying out those different avenues, see how you go. Take the time to get to know people, work out if you can work with them. They'll be sussing you out, working out if they can work with you. So give yourself the time to do that as well.
Oh, great. Thank you both. I've got another question in the chat here. So Jay says, communication for impact and advocacy is important and appears to result in lots of great non-academic outputs. have you had any issues with the speedy non-academic outputs disrupting long-term academic outputs?
I haven't yet. I know that it can be a problem, particularly if a journal has got really strict sort of publishing regulations around not being able to publish anything that's sort of related to that. And but so one example comes to mind. I recently where we were sort of commissioned to do scoping review and it was by with Thriving Queensland Kids Partnership, and we had a couple of reports that we published with them, and then we also wrote that up for publication for a journal, and that got published in the journal. And it worked actually really well because of the fact that the way that we wrote it for a non-academic publication in a report was so completely different to the way that it that it was written for the journal. And we actually did publish that ahead of the journal article, obviously, because the getting it ready for submission and the submission process and all the rest of it can take a really long time. So I personally haven't had any issues. I'm just kind of mindful of that. I think that's what you're sort of getting at by that question, Jay.
Lovely. Did you have anything to add, Zoe?
I don't really. It's been a similar experience. We have often, like you say, the research project report is often very, very different. It's targeted at a very different audience. And then the academic outputs will be nested from that sort of thing. So it hasn't been an issue so far, but yeah, fingers crossed, it may be in the future.
The biggest issue I found is that I lose a bit of steam by the time it comes to writing up the academic output, and it just feels like a real drag because I think I've already done this. It's already out there. Oh my God. So that, to me, that's the biggest issue is I'm not interested any longer, but I have to do this for my KPIs.
Agreed.
Great. Lovely. I've got a hand up. Feel free to unmute there, Joelle.
Hi, thank you, Zoe and Letitia. That was wonderful. It was really insightful, and thanks for sharing your wisdom with us and experience. Similar to Zoe, my sort of background is having worked sort of in the government sphere, and I know the way that they sort of make policy can sometimes be not at odds, and I'm formulating this question as I go because there's something in there that I really want to know, and there's sort of a two-pronged approach. But I know, sort of having worked in London as well, sort of in think tanks, and we don't really have much of that sort of going on, particularly in Queensland. But they're sometimes, they're not academic focused. Obviously, those think tanks, they're not sort of concerned with publishing peer-reviewed journals. And I'm sort of trying to think, politicians have possibly in government the most impact in some of the work that we do in welfare and sort of the social sciences. What do you think sort of the academic lens, what in terms of academia, what does that offer over and above, the non-academic sort of organizations, what they can bring? I guess I'm sort of thinking of that dichotomy, sort of there's sort of like these places, these advocacy organizations versus the politicians that make the big decisions, and then us where we sit, as academics, and yeah, how can we influence that, and
No, Zoe, you can.
as I say, it's a lot of in there, so just
my initial response was going to say, well, we bring academic rigor, that's the value that we bring. But honestly, with the work that I've seen, we've worked with government departments before in our team, and I've worked with, community organizations, and there's no less rigorous, right? There's people are not less rigorous outside academia. So what value do I bring? Sometimes I can find that to be a bit of a difficult question. Sometimes I feel like I don't bring enough value. Sometimes I question my own purpose inside. You know, the universities can be a strange place, and we've got so many conflicting priorities, you know, in this neoliberal kind of organization. And then what I feel like I've come to, and I wonder if this is because partly as well because my experience is working multidisciplinarily, and I can feel a bit weird working alongside a pediatrician who's got a heck of a lot more knowledge than what I do inside my little brain, is that I just bring the value that I can. And so regardless of where I'm situated as an academic or whatever, you know, I'm tasked with this job to understand a certain thing and to find out as much about that as I can, and then to send that to government. And if they see a purpose for that, that's great. At the core of it, that's kind of what I try to do, is to remove my own title from myself in a way, and just say, well, this is what I'm doing now. And I will package this information up in the best way I possibly can, and I will deliver that to the community organisation or the government or the hospital administrative board or whatever, and say, this is the knowledge that I have that's been made with other people. I don't know if that answers your question, and that felt a bit rambly.
No, it does. Yeah, because it's the question that I have in my mind as well. What value do I bring? And, you know, having sort of seen the way that government operates, sometimes they got these policy officers that inform them, you know, and that's how decisions are come to made. You know, it's not necessarily even, you know, all our journal articles mean nothing sometimes in that sort of sphere. But yeah, but I don't know, sort of, yeah. How do you bridge that, Zoe?
Yeah, it's a big question. I felt the same as you, Letitia. I was going to say something around academic rigor, and I then went through the same thought process and went, yeah. But I think one thing that we do bring, though, is the opportunity and the privilege, actually, of having full academic freedom. Well, full-ish academic freedom. We all know there are some constraints around that these days. And, you know, that's obviously a crucially important thing for public institutions like universities. Sorry, so I keep on having to correct myself. Semi-public institutions like universities, again, this day, in these days, I should say, you know, to be able to contribute to public debate in a way that is genuinely non-partisan, or at least genuinely is able to be non-partisan, and that is genuinely able to bring academic freedom. We can, to some extent, say what we want. That has not been my experience, and it probably wasn't yours, Jo, working in government. Definitely not. And even working in nonprofits, the nonprofit had a certain agenda. And I know that's you know, it's not that they're not doing good research. They're doing good research. There's good research being done in government, but the ability to actually be free to really take the research findings for what they are, rather than having to think about how one might massage those research findings to fit a minister's agenda, for instance, is something that we can bring, and we can, you know, that's a crucial kind of cornerstone of universities, public universities. And it's why it's such a, you know, such a worry that public funding towards universities continues to be stripped away. But I'll get off my political kind of, you know, I'll stop on that tangent. But yeah, I think that, you know, that's a crucially important thing that we can bring to those partnerships.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, that was a great question. Thank you for that. I think I've just got one more in the chat. We've got a few minutes left. So Callum just wants to know, do either of you have any advice around where to start when disseminating research, particularly for those who might not have established community or industry partnerships? If either of you have any input there.
Yeah, thank you, Callum. I think probably some of the things that we've talked about, you know, thinking it, so disseminating in particular, so I'm assuming the research has already been done, and then it's, you know, how to get it out there. So using some of those channels that don't require you to already have really strong networks of your own, like social media, but also making contact with cold calling, cold emailing, industry partners in your area who you think would benefit from your research can be helpful as well. So I'll often just, if I've written a report or an article, I'll often email some of my contacts, but also some additional kind of cold call contacts to say, hey, look, I know that you're working in this area. This might or might not be useful to you, but here it is attached. And that's beneficial because even though we've got the kind of Council of Australian Librarians call agreement around, which has increased open access publishing now for academic outputs, we still have so much of our research locked up behind paywalls, and often, particularly in nonprofits, but also when I was in government, but that was a while ago now, maybe they've improved their subscriptions. Here comes my cat again. You know, accessing those kinds of research outputs that are locked behind paywalls is near impossible. And usually we did it through the one person or the two people who still had alumni access through their previous university, right? So doing that, pushing it out to people who you think will actually be able to use the research and make, you know, and for whom it will be really relevant is good. Lots of people publish and disseminate their research, and now it's a requirement for ARC funding schemes to put your preprint up as open access. So that can be another good way to make sure that it's getting out there, and also overcoming those paywalls for people who want to find out about it. But like I said before, contacting your media team at your university can be helpful as well, because they can even do little things like, here comes the cat again, like retweet, you know, from their profile that has a lot more followers, or, you know, push out a story in their newsletter or something like that. So those can be good places to start.
Yeah, when I was doing my PhD, on Twitter, I used to @UQ News for every single thing that I that I was doing, and they would then retweet it, and it was like that actually kind of worked. I got a couple of media calls, you know, for some of the stuff that I was doing with my PhD. So that was kind of cool. I don't know if it was through them or through my own tweeting at the time, but that can work if you've got some interesting things that you're doing with the PhD, or anything work, just kind of putting it out there through social media channels. And yeah, and I was going to say exactly the same as Zoe, just sending it to people who you think might be interested in it.
Oh, incredible. Thank you so much. We've just got a couple minutes left, so I think we'll wrap up now if no one else has any questions. Letitia and Zoe, thank you much for coming along today. It's been wonderful, a wonderful discussion. We're all thrilled to have you.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, great.
Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Lovely.